Let's talk about objects. Now, Java is an object oriented programming language, which means that when you create programs in Java, you typically create many different objects. And those objects then interact with each other to give you different sorts of results. Objects are typically things that represent entities from real life. For example, a car, a house, a person, an animal, and stuff like that. So let's think of such an object. Let's say we are thinking of a dog. Now, a dog can a dog can have a lot of different things, but when we are representing a dog as an object, we think of three different things. We think of this object's identity, something that can uniquely identify this particular object. We can think of its attributes, some some things that it can have. For example, a dog might have color, age, breed, size, and things like that. And an object can have behaviors, things that that object can do. So for this dog, let's say we think of its identity as Sherlock. Let's say we call this dog Sherlock. What can be its attributes? As we already mentioned, it can have a color. And let's say for this particular dog, the color is white. So the value of the color attribute for Sherlock is white. Next, we can think of its age. So the value of the age attribute for Sherlock is 7 years. Now, we can also think of its breed as an attribute. And the value of the breed attribute for Sherlock is Labrador, let's say. Now, we can think of its behaviors. What can the dog do? The dog can bark, so Sherlock can bark. The dog can run, the dog can sleep, the dog can eat, and so on. The different kinds of behaviors that the dog can have. Now, why are we putting brackets or parentheses after the behaviors? We'll understand it when we understand methods. But for now, let's just have it there. Now, this was an example of a dog. The dog had an identity named Sherlock. It had a few attributes, and it had some behaviors. Can we think of another different object? Let's say we're thinking of a phone. When we're thinking of a phone can have its identity as well. Let's say, and it'll have attributes and behaviors. So let's say its identity is that it's an iPhone XS. What could be its attributes? So it could have an attribute named company, and the value of the company attribute for iPhone XS would be Apple. Let's say another attribute can be battery life, and the value of that attribute, let's say, is 24 hours. Another attribute can be its memory. So let's say the value of the memory attribute for iPhone XS is 64 gigabytes. What kind of behaviors can this phone have? What kind of abilities can this phone have? What can this phone do? It could make calls, it could send texts, or it could take pictures. And it could do many other things, but let's just stick with these three examples. So now I hope you understand how objects can be thought of when we are trying to code for them. We can think of objects as having three different things: their identity, their attributes, and their behaviors. Now, let's think of a couple more examples. Let's say you're creating a graphics design software. Now, you can have a lot of different objects in that software. You could have a circle as an object, let's say. You can have a square as an object, let's say. Or even the menu can be an object for your software. And so you can have many other such objects in your graphics design software. Another example would be an online shopping system. There, you can have objects such as a cart, the cart can be an object when you add products to it that you want to buy. And in the end, when you check out, your cart will have all the objects that you have selected to buy. So your cart can be an object. Your customer can be an object if you're designing an online shopping system. Then your customer can be an object, and your customers will be basically the users of your system. The products that you might have on your online shopping system would also be different objects. So each object here, there could be a lot of different circles that the graphics design software can have, right? So circle would have an identity because it's an object. It will have its own attributes and it will have its own behaviors. In the same way, square will have its own identity, will have its own attributes, and will have its own behaviors. Menu items will have their own identity, attributes, and behaviors as well. So would be the case for a cart in an online shopping system. A customer will also have an identity, some behaviors, and some attributes. And the products will also have some identity, attributes, and behaviors. Now, you know how an object can be thought of when we're thinking of programming them in Java. But how do we create these objects? Whenever we want to create an object, we need to have a blueprint of that object. We need to have a recipe of that object, something that can help us understand how an object behaves, or how an object can be represented. So that we do with a class. So a class is a blueprint. So think of a blueprint at first. Let's say you are building a lot of different houses, right? And you have a blueprint of how to build a house. Now, let's say this blueprint is what you got from the engineers. This is how you build a house. Now, you can use this blueprint to create many different houses. You can create your first house using this blueprint. You can create another house using this blueprint. And then you can create a third house using this blueprint. And then you can create as many different houses as you want using this blueprint. Now, this blueprint in our example would then actually be a class. This blueprint can be thought of as a class. And ultimately, the houses that you make can be thought of as different objects. So the houses would be the different objects. This would be a different house. So let's say this is Sam's house. Let's say this is another building. Let's say this is Jenny's house. And let's say this is Tom's house. So each of these different houses are different objects. Each house will have a different identity. This house's identity is Sam's house. This house's identity is Jenny's house. This house's identity is Tom's house. This house will have the same attributes as this house, and this house will also have the same attributes as all the other houses, because you created it from the same blueprint, right? So all of these houses will have attributes, behaviors, and identities, but the identity would be different and the values of the attributes would be different, but the behaviors will be more or less the same. So let's say you want to create a dog object. In order to create this dog object, at first you'll need to create a dog class. And from this class, you will then create the object, just like we discussed here. First, you have the blueprint. You have to create the blueprint first. And from this blueprint, you'll be able to create as many different objects as you want. Let's say this is a blueprint for a house. You'll be able to create as many house objects as you want from this blueprint. If you want to create different dogs, then at first you'll have to create a dog class. And then from there, you can create as many different dog objects as you want. Of course, each dog will have a different identity. So let's say the new dog that you create will have a different identity. Let's say the new dog's name would be Watson, and maybe the color attribute for the new dog named Watson would be, let's say, black, and maybe the age attribute for Watson would be 6 years, and maybe the breed attribute for Watson would be a golden retriever. Now, the behaviors would be the same for Watson. In the same way, you can create a third dog and a fourth dog and a fifth dog, but you can create them very easily using the class. And of course, we'll look at how we create the class. In the same way, if you want to create many different phone objects, at first, you'll have to create a phone class. Let me change the color for this. You'll have to create a phone class. And once you've created the phone class, from there, you'll be able to create as many different phones as you want. So maybe this phone's identity is iPhone XS, but the new phone that you want to create, or a different phone that you want to create, might be Samsung, right? So you might have a different phone named Samsung. And maybe the company name, or actually, the identity would be, let's say, Galaxy 10 or something like that. And the company name for this different phone object would be Samsung. The battery life may be similar, or maybe a bit more, I don't know, 25 hours. And the memory might be, let's say, 128 gigabytes, right? And the behaviors will be more or less the same. And this is how you can think of how we can create many different objects from a class. And so this is an overview of what a class is. But remember that whenever you're trying to create an object, you would always want to create it from a class. And a class is a blueprint. In the next video, we'll talk more about how to design a class and how we can create objects from class.